It all came to an end on what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. My fiancé, her parents, stood before our friends and family and publicly mocked my late mother at our rehearsal dinner. They turned her memory into a punchline, a joke for their own amusement. So I stood up, and without a second thought, I called off the wedding in front of every single person in that room. My name is Leo, I'm 33 years old, and until that night, I was engaged to Clara. She was the woman I honestly, truly believed I would spend the rest of my life with. We met about 6 years ago, a classic story of mutual friends and a summer cookout. I can still picture her from that day. She was standing by the grill, arguing playfully about the right way to season a burger, and then she turned and caught my eye. Her smile, God, it was incredible. It wasn't just a polite gesture. It was this brilliant, all-encompassing thing that lit up her entire face. She was quick with a joke, sharp and funny, and we just fell into conversation so easily it felt like we'd known each other for years. We just clicked. It's a simple word for a feeling that's anything but. It was a sense of immediate comfort, of recognition. I knew right then and there that she was someone special. When I decided to propose a year ago, there was no hesitation, no deep soul-searching debate. It felt as natural as breathing. It was the right time, and she was, without question, the right person. Or so I thought. At the time, I understood I wasn't just marrying Clara. I knew I was also, in a way, marrying her family. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor, are the kind of people who command a room simply by walking into it. They thrive on being the center of attention. They're loud, aggressively opinionated, and they always have a comment about everything, from the wine you choose to the way you drive. At first, I chalked it up to a personality quirk, a kind of boisterous, over-the-top charm. But the more time I spent with them, the more I saw how a deep-seated sense of entitlement bled into everything they did. It was in the way they spoke to waiters, the way they expected things to go their way, and the subtle, constant implication that they knew best about everything. It was a slow burn realization, one I tried to ignore for a long time for Clara's sake. Before we get to exactly what went down at that dinner, I need to tell you about my mom. Her name was Helen, and she was, without any exaggeration, the best person I have ever known. The world has felt a little dimmer since she passed away 2 years ago, after a brutal 3-year battle with cancer. Watching her fight that insidious disease, seeing the toll it took on her body, and yet still witnessing her find the strength to put other people first, it was humbling. It was a masterclass in grace. She taught me everything I know about kindness, about real generosity, and about the quiet courage it takes to stand up for what is right. Mom wasn't just my rock, she was a lifeline for a lot of people. She had this incredible, gentle way of stepping in and helping people without ever making them feel embarrassed or indebted to her. She wouldn't announce her good deeds. She would just see a need and quietly do what needed to be done, moving on before you even had a chance to properly thank her. That quiet, unwavering support extended to Clara's family. Robert and Eleanor owe so much to my mother, a debt of gratitude so massive it's staggering. But you would never, ever know it by the way they talk about her now. It makes my blood run cold just thinking about it. When I first introduced Clara to my mom, back before she got sick, it went well enough on the surface. My mom, with her open heart, told me she liked Clara. She saw the smile and the wit that I had fallen for, and Clara, for her part, always seemed polite and respectful. But as things between us got more serious, a strange pattern began to emerge. It became obvious that Clara didn't truly get along with my mom. It was never a big, dramatic confrontation. It was something far more insidious. It was in the small, dismissive comments she would make after we'd visit. Things like calling my mom overly involved or a little too eager to help. Every time she said something like that, it rubbed me the wrong way. It felt like a fundamental misunderstanding of who my mother was. But I made excuses. I told myself it was just nerves, or maybe it was just Clara trying to navigate the delicate process of becoming part of a new family. I wanted to believe it was anything other than what it really was, a lack of respect. The thing is, it wasn't just a vague feeling or a few misplaced comments. My mom did so much for Clara's family, things that were concrete, significant, and life-altering. Years ago, their family restaurant, the Sterling Plate, was on the absolute brink of shutting down. Robert and Eleanor had poured everything they had into it, but bad decisions and a tough economy had pushed them to the edge of bankruptcy. They were desperate. No bank would give them a loan. The risk was just too high. I remember the tension in their house, the panicked phone calls, the way the stress was physically wearing on them. And I remember the conversation I had with my mom about it. She listened quietly, her brow furrowed with concern, as I explained their situation. After thinking it over for a day, she called me. "I'll co-sign the loan," she said, her voice calm and steady. I was stunned. "Mom, are you sure? That's a huge risk." She just said, "I know, Leo, but they're good people who are in over their heads. Sometimes all people need is for one person to believe in them." And so she did it. My mother, who was by no means wealthy, put her own financial security on the line because she believed in them. She didn't stop there. She spent her weekends with them, not as a creditor, but as a friend. She helped them organize their chaotic finances, poring over spreadsheets and receipts at their dining room table, and helped them put together a solid business plan to make the restaurant profitable again. And it worked. The Sterling Plate survived, and Robert and Eleanor were able to keep their livelihood, their home, everything. A year or so later, their industrial oven, the heart of their kitchen, broke down completely. They didn't have the thousands of dollars in cash needed to replace it immediately, and every day without it meant losing business they couldn't afford to lose. Without even being asked, my mom paid for a new one outright. She just transferred the money into their account. She never asked for it back, never mentioned it again, not even years later when her own medical bills began to pile up, and that money would have made a world of difference. That's just the kind of person she was. Her generosity was as natural to her as breathing. Then there was Clara's older brother, Daniel. He was struggling to finish college and was short on tuition for his final semester. He was about to drop out to have his degree, the thing he'd worked so hard for, slip through his fingers. When my mom heard about it, she didn't hesitate. She stepped in and covered the entire cost. "Education," she told me once, holding my hand, "is the one thing in this world that no one can ever take away from you." It wasn't just about the money she gave. It was her time, her energy, her very essence. She spent countless hours helping Eleanor with bookkeeping advice and would often babysit Daniel's kids so he could get a few precious hours to focus on his studies. And let me tell you, not once, not a single time, did Robert, Eleanor, or Daniel ever properly thank her. Oh, sure, they'd say a quick thanks in passing, the same way you'd thank someone for holding a door open. But there was never any real, heartfelt acknowledgement of the monumental things she'd done for them. No one ever sat her down and said, "Helen, you saved us." My mom, of course, never cared about that. She wasn't in it for the recognition or the praise. She just wanted to help people. She saw a need and she filled it. End of story. When my mom passed away, my world simply fell apart. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing presence that made it hard to breathe. She was my anchor, my compass, my whole world, and losing her felt like a fundamental piece of me was just gone forever. Clara was there for me during the worst of it, or at least I tried to convince myself she was. Looking back now, with the painful clarity of hindsight, I realize a lot of her support was more about performing a role than offering genuine comfort. She was doing the bare minimum. She would say things that on the surface sounded supportive, but felt hollow and dismissive. I remember one evening, a few months after the funeral, I was having a particularly rough day. I was just sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, and she came and sat beside me. "You know," she said, her tone a little too bright, "you really need to start moving on. Your mom wouldn't want you to be stuck in your grief like this." And yes, maybe that was true in a literal sense, but the words didn't feel comforting, They felt like a judgment. It felt like my grief was an inconvenience to her, a problem to be solved, rather than a process to be endured. It was the first time I felt a true, chilling distance between us. In the months leading up to the wedding, I started noticing more of these red flags, little moments of discord that seemed to pop up with increasing frequency. Clara was weirdly, almost stubbornly dismissive anytime I tried to bring up my mom in our conversations about the ceremony. It was as if the mere mention of Helen's name was an inconvenience to her perfect wedding plans. For example, I had this idea of including a small, simple tribute to my mom during our vows. It wouldn't have been anything dramatic, just a single sentence acknowledging her, letting her spirit be present in the most important moment of my life. I brought it up one evening while we were finalizing the order of the ceremony. I was thinking, I started, trying to sound casual, it would be nice to just mention my mom when we exchange vows. Something like, I know my mother, Helen, is smiling down on us today. Clara didn't even look up from the magazine she was flipping through. She just said, "Oh, I don't know, Leo. Isn't that going to make people sad? Weddings are supposed to be happy occasions." Her words were so casual, so unthinking. A happy occasion? As if acknowledging the most important person in my life would somehow taint the joy of the day? I tried to explain that it would be happy for me, that it would feel like she was there with us, but Clara just brushed it off again. "It just feels a little heavy for a wedding, don't you think?" she said, finally looking at me. "Let's just keep things light." I let it slide. I can't tell you how much I regret that now. I didn't want to start a fight, so I buried my hurt and nodded. But that little concession, that act of silencing my own needs to keep the peace, began to feel like a heavy stone in my gut. And it was just one of many that were piling up. Then there were the comments from Robert and Eleanor. They had this infuriating way of talking down to me, a casual, smiling condescension that made my skin crawl. It was clear they thought Clara was marrying beneath her. Robert once made a joke at a family dinner, clapping me on the back a little too hard. "I'll say this for you, Leo," he'd boomed so everyone at the table could hear. "Clara has always known what she wanted, and now she's marrying someone who will definitely keep her grounded." He smirked, as if he'd said something clever. A few people chuckled nervously. Grounded? It was his polite way of calling me simple, of implying I was dragging his daughter down from some higher social perch. Eleanor was just as bad, though her method was more subtle, wrapped in a veneer of maternal concern. She would say things like, "Well, we all have to make sacrifices for love," while looking directly at me, as if Clara was performing some great act of charity by agreeing to be my wife. It was a constant barrage of tiny cuts, each one stinging more than the last, and I just took it. I kept my mouth shut for Clara's sake, hoping that my silence would make things easier for her. I kept telling myself that this was just how they were, and that once the wedding was over and the dust settled, things would get better. We would be our own family, and their opinions would fade into the background. God, I couldn't have been more wrong. So fast forward to about a month before the wedding. That's when things really started to unravel, when all the little red flags started waving like frantic banners in a storm. Clara's parents, Robert and Eleanor, had offered to host the rehearsal dinner at the Azure Room, a fancy, upscale restaurant they had connections with. On the surface, it seemed like a genuinely nice gesture. My first reaction was relief. I thought that maybe this was their way of trying to smooth over all the snide comments and awkward moments that had plagued the wedding planning. I even let myself believe for a fleeting moment that this was them finally stepping up, showing some class, and welcoming me into the family. But their offer wasn't just an offer. They made a huge production out of how incredibly generous they were being. Eleanor brought it up in almost every conversation. "Oh, we've just put so much effort into making this rehearsal dinner absolutely perfect for you two," she'd say, her voice dripping with self-congratulation. "It's going to be the talk of the town, you'll see." Robert, of course, chimed in every chance he got, reminding me and everyone else within earshot that the Azure Room was one of the best restaurants in the entire area, and that we were just so lucky they were able to pull strings and secure it for our event. The whole thing quickly started to feel less like a gift and more like a massive ego boost for them, a stage for them to perform their own importance. But whatever, my focus was on getting married to the woman I loved, so I foolishly let them take the reins on the rehearsal dinner. That was a big, big mistake. As we got closer to the date, Robert and Eleanor's true colors started to shine through with blinding intensity. Every single conversation with them, no matter how trivial, seemed to turn into an opportunity for some kind of backhanded comment or a passive-aggressive remark aimed squarely at me. The veneer of generosity was gone, replaced by an undisguised air of superiority. For example, I tried to confirm the guest list for the dinner. A few of my own relatives had been asking for details, and I wanted to make sure they were properly included. I called Eleanor, expecting a simple conversation. "Eleanor, hi, it's Leo," I said politely. "I was just wondering if you could send me the final guest list for Saturday. My aunt was asking about the time, and I just wanted to double-check everything." There was a pause on the line, followed by an audible, patronizing sigh. "We'll handle it, Leo," she said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that did nothing to hide her annoyance. "Honestly, your only job is to show up and enjoy yourself." It was such a small thing, but it bugged me immensely. The message was clear. This was their show, and I was just a supporting character. This was supposed to be our event, celebrating our marriage. Shouldn't Clara and I have the final say in who was coming? Then there was the menu. Eleanor made a monumental deal about how they were curating a high-end, bespoke dining experience for the night. She would describe the courses in exhaustive detail during phone calls, always with a little verbal jab at the end. "Oh, we've convinced the chef to create something truly special for the main course," she gushed one afternoon. "A deconstructed beef Wellington with a truffle foam. It's divine. Nothing like what you'd normally find back home, Leo." That last part was her favorite dig, back home. She adored reminding me that I wasn't from their world, that I came from a small, working-class town. My background was a source of quiet pride for me, but they never let me forget that. To them, it was a deficiency. I tried to brush it all off. I focused on the bigger picture, on my love for Clara. "It's just one night," I kept repeating to myself like a mantra. Smile, nod, and get through it. But even Clara was starting to act strange. Or perhaps I was just starting to see her more clearly. She had always had this habit of siding with her parents, of defaulting to their opinion on things. But in the weeks leading up to the dinner, it got so much worse. Any time I tried to voice an idea or a concern about her parents' aggressive takeover of the event, she would wave it off with a flick of her wrist. "Leo, you're overthinking this," she'd say, not looking up from her phone. "My parents know what they're doing. They have excellent taste." The problem was, it was no longer just about the dinner. It was about the way they consistently made me feel like an outsider in my own relationship. They treated me like I was some lucky contest winner, someone who should just be grateful that their perfect daughter was willing to marry him. And Clara, not once, stuck up for me. If anything, she encouraged it by laughing along with their jokes or dismissing my feelings as an overreaction whenever I dared to bring it up later in private. A week before the dinner, an incident occurred that should have been the final, blaring alarm bell I needed. We were at her parents' house, supposedly finalizing some last-minute details for the wedding. Eleanor was in full command mode, flipping through binders of seating charts and floral arrangements like a general planning a military campaign. At one point, I saw a picture of the proposed centerpieces for the reception. They were enormous, ostentatious towers of roses and orchids. "They're a little much, don't you think?" I said carefully. "Maybe we could do something simpler. My mom always loved lavender. Something like that would be nice." Eleanor didn't even look up from her binder. She just gave a tight little smile and said, "Oh, Helen had interesting taste, didn't she? But this is Clara's day. Let's keep things modern and elegant, shall we?" I froze. The jab was so subtle, yet it landed like a punch to the gut. The dismissive tone, the past tense she used for the word taste, as if it were a character flaw. I looked over at Clara, expecting, pleading with my eyes for her to say something, to defend my mother's memory. But she didn't say a word. She was completely engrossed in her phone, scrolling through social media as if nothing had happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Eleanor out right then and there, but I couldn't find my voice. I swallowed my pride and the anger that was burning in my throat and stayed quiet. Looking back, I hate myself for not saying something in that moment. It felt like every little insult and slight was a brick being added to a wall between us, and I just kept letting them build it. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was really just sacrificing my own dignity. The day of the rehearsal dinner finally arrived, and I could already feel the thick, suffocating tension in the air. Claire and I drove to the restaurant together, and the silence in the car was deafening. I tried to make small talk, to lighten the mood, but she was distant, offering only one-word answers while she scrolled endlessly through her phone. When I asked if she was excited, she just shrugged without looking at me. "It's just a dinner, Leo," she said. "Don't stress." Just a dinner? Right. The moment we pulled up to the Azure Room, I knew it was anything but. The place was over the top, a monument to wealth and pretension. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open our doors. The building itself was all glass and dark wood, with enormous chandeliers visible through the windows, dripping crystals like frozen tears. It was the kind of place that was designed to scream, "Look how important we are." And honestly, it just made me feel smaller and more out of place with every step I took. When we walked in, Robert and Eleanor were already there, holding court like they owned the place. Robert was standing near the entrance, a wide, political smile plastered on his face, shaking hands with guests as they arrived. Eleanor was gliding through the room, giving sharp, quiet instructions to the restaurant staff, who scurried around her like nervous servants. The whole scene felt less like a warm family gathering and more like a corporate gala or a political fundraiser. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-important chatter. As the guests continued to trickle in, I started to notice something deeply unsettling. I scanned the room for familiar faces from my side, and I could count them on one hand. My dad was there, looking deeply uncomfortable in his suit. My sister was by his side, along with her husband, and maybe 2 or 3 of my closest friends. That was it. Everyone else, and there must have been over 100 people there, was either a relative of Clara's or, more commonly, one of her parents' business associates. They had turned our rehearsal dinner into a networking event. It was a spectacle for their benefit, and we were just the excuse. I felt a hot surge of anger and pulled Clara aside, keeping my voice low. "What is going on?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Why are there more of your parents' colleagues here than my actual family?" She gave me this exasperated look, the one I was starting to know so well. "Leo, your family is small," she said, as if explaining something to a child. "My parents had to fill the room somehow to make it look good. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal? That had become her answer for everything, a universal balm for every hurt, every slight, every moment of disrespect. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood and went back to trying to mingle, but I couldn't shake the cold, hard feeling that this dinner wasn't about us at all. They had hijacked what was supposed to be a celebration of our love and turned it into their own personal stage. After everyone had eaten, the real show started, the speeches. Robert, naturally, was the first one up. He grabbed the microphone from the stand with the confidence of a man who has given 1,000 keynote addresses, not a man talking about his daughter's wedding. He tapped the mic, cleared his throat, and began. Welcome, everyone, welcome, he boomed. Tonight is about celebrating the union of two families, our beloved Clara and, of course, Leo. He said my name like it was a piece of gristle he was trying to discreetly spit into a napkin. I was sitting there, trying to breathe, trying to stay calm, but every word out of his mouth was a thinly veiled insult wrapped in the guise of a toast. He launched into a long monologue about how proud he was of Clara, how she's always been the star of the family. She has always known what she wanted in life and has gone after it with everything she has, he declared. And now she's marrying someone who will keep her grounded. He let a little smirk play on his lips, and I swear a couple of his buddies near the front chuckled. I just stared at him, my wine glass frozen halfway to my lips, wondering if I'd heard him right. He then said something that made the whole room feel colder. You know, we've always taught Clara to aim high, and while Leo might not be what we envisioned at first, he trailed off, letting the sentence hang in the air with a smug look, as if it was supposed to be a charmingly funny admission. I could feel my dad's stare burning a hole into the side of Robert's head from across the table. Next up was Eleanor. She strutted to the microphone like she was about to accept an Oscar. Her speech started off with syrupy sweetness, talking about how much she adored her perfect daughter and how excited she was for the wedding. But then the clause came out. Clara has always been the perfect daughter, and she deserves the very best in life, she said, pausing for effect. And it's a good thing she's so patient, because she's taught Leo so much already. I almost choked on my water. What had Clara taught me? How to tolerate being patronized at every turn? Eleanor then turned to me, a fake, pitying smile on her face. And we are so happy to welcome you into the family, Leo. It will be nice to finally have someone around who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty, right? She let out a sharp, artificial laugh, and a few of her relatives dutifully joined in. I risked a glance at Clara, my last hope, praying she'd step in or at least look mortified on my behalf. But she was smiling. She was smiling right along with them, a bright, untroubled smile, as if her mother had just told the most harmless joke in the world. And just when I thought it couldn't possibly get any worse, just when I was desperately trying to hold on to the last frayed thread of my composure, Robert got back up. He clinked his glass with a spoon, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the low murmur of the room. One last thing, everyone, before we wrap this up, he announced, that same self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who's no longer with us, but who played such a big role in shaping who Leo is today. His mom, Helen. For a single, fleeting, idiotic split second, my heart leaped with a foolish sense of hope. For a moment, I thought he might actually say something kind, something to redeem the ugliness of the last 10 minutes. Maybe this was the olive branch. Maybe this was his clumsy attempt at making things right. No, not even close. Helen was truly one of a kind, Robert began, a strange, mocking twinkle in his eye. She had a real habit of inserting herself into situations, didn't she? Always had an opinion about how things should be done. He laughed, a short, barking sound, and Eleanor, from her seat, chimed in loud enough for the whole table to hear. Oh, she definitely had strong opinions. Remember how she always insisted on helping us, even when we didn't ask for it? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. They were talking about my mother's generosity, her quiet and selfless support, as if it were a character flaw. They were painting her as some kind of nosy, meddling neighbor. The woman who saved their business, who paid for their son's education, was being posthumously ridiculed for their entertainment. Robert wasn't done. He raised his glass higher. But in all seriousness, he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity, Helen was a generous woman. She helped us out a lot. Sometimes, maybe a little too much, if I'm being honest. He actually winked at one of his friends at a nearby table, as if this were all some hilarious inside joke. The room was uncomfortably quiet now, but Robert, high on his own performance, just kept going, barreling towards his grand finale. We'll be sure to keep her spirit alive at the wedding. Let's just hope Leo doesn't inherit her enthusiasm for taking charge, though. We wouldn't want him meddling too much, would we? That was it. That was the moment something inside me shattered. I felt the blood rush to my face, a hot, prickling wave of pure rage. My hands clenched into fists under the table, my knuckles white. I slowly turned my head to look at Clara, my last resort, my fiancée, waiting, begging her with my eyes to say something, to do something, but she just laughed. It wasn't a pained or uncomfortable laugh. It was a light, airy, genuine laugh. She playfully rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, Dad, stop," like it was all just harmless fun. Harmless fun. They were standing there, mocking my dead mother's memory in a room full of people, and the woman I was supposed to marry, the woman I loved, thought it was funny. In that instant, the floor dropped out from under my world. The worst part was that Robert and Eleanor acted like they were being charming, like they had just delivered the wittiest, most delightful toast of all time. They had these smug, self-congratulatory looks on their faces, as if they expected a round of applause. When Robert finally sat down, the tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. The clinking of forks and glasses resumed, but it was hesitant now, awkward, as people tried to move on from the absolute train wreck of a speech they'd just witnessed. Clara leaned over to me, her perfume suddenly cloying and unbearable, and whispered, "Are you okay?" Her tone was completely casual, as if she were asking if I wanted more bread, not as if my entire world had just been set on fire. I couldn't even look at her. I just gave a single jerky nod, my jaw clenched so tight I was surprised my teeth didn't crack from the pressure. But then, Eleanor, emboldened by her perceived success, walked over to our table, a fake sweet smile plastered on her face. "Leo," she said sweetly, "I do hope you weren't offended. Robert and I just wanted to add a little bit of humor to the evening. You know, it's all in good fun." All in good fun. That's when something inside me snapped. Every ounce of restraint I had, every moment I had swallowed my pride for the sake of peace, it all evaporated. I couldn't stay quiet for one more second. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the polished floor, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent room. "Are you serious right now?" I said. My voice was low, but it shook with an anger so profound it's scary even me. So, there I was, standing in the middle of the most expensive, pretentious restaurant I'd ever set foot in. My chair was still tipped slightly back from the force of me standing up. The entire room had gone completely, utterly, dead silent. It was like someone had hit a universal mute button. Every clink of a glass, every whisper, every breath seemed to have ceased. 100 pairs of eyes were all fixed on me. But for the first time all night, I didn't care. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and my face was burning. But beneath the rage was a strange, liberating clarity. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not let this go. Robert and Eleanor's public mockery of my mom was already a mortal wound, but that sickeningly sweet fake apology from Eleanor, that was the final twist of the knife. That was the insult I could not swallow. "Are you serious right now?" I repeated, my voice stronger this time, cutting through the silence. I looked directly at Eleanor, whose polite smile had frozen and was now beginning to crumble into a look of disbelief. Robert looked up from his drink, his expression shifting from amusement to annoyance, as if I had just committed an unforgivable breach of etiquette. Beside me, I heard Clara whisper my name, her voice tight with panic. "Leo, stop. Sit down." I ignored her completely. My focus was a laser beam aimed directly at her parents. "Let me just get this straight," I said, my voice rising, gaining volume with every word. You two spent the entire night taking cheap shots at me, which, fine, I can take, but then you stood up here and you took shots at my mom, the woman who single-handedly saved your family from ruin, the woman who showed you nothing but kindness. And now you have the audacity to stand there and tell me it was all just a joke? You think that's okay? Robert leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest in a deliberate display of nonchalance. "Relax, Leo," he said, that infuriating smirk returning to his face. He clearly thought he was still in control of the situation. "You're overreacting. It was all in good fun." "Good fun?" I shot back, my voice cracking with disbelief. "Are you kidding me? You called her meddling. You said she was too much. You stood there and you mocked her generosity, the very quality that kept your restaurant from being boarded up, and you twisted it into some kind of personality flaw. How in God's name was any of that good fun?" The tension in the room had become a physical presence. It was heavy, suffocating. I could see a few of Clara's cousins staring down at their plates, their faces flushed with discomfort. They knew. They knew what my mom had done for their family. My dad, on the other hand, was now staring daggers directly at Robert, his expression a mask of cold fury. My sister had her arms crossed, glaring at Eleanor like she was personally restraining herself from leaping across the table. Eleanor, bless her heart, tried to laugh it off, a high-pitched, nervous sound that fooled no one. "Oh, Leo, please don't be so sensitive," she chirped, waving a dismissive hand. "We were just sharing a few little stories. Everyone here knows how Helen liked to take charge." I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. Her denial was so complete, so absolute. "Take charge?" I said, my voice now shaking with an anger that was so pure, so righteous, it felt like it was purifying me. "Is that what you call it? She helped you. When your precious restaurant was about to go under, she co-signed a loan that no bank in the world would have given you. When your oven broke and you were about to lose a week of business, she paid for a new one out of her own pocket. She paid for your son's college tuition so he wouldn't have to drop out. She gave you her time, her energy, her money, her heart. And this is how you repay her? By turning her memory into a punchline at a rehearsal dinner? You think this is sensitivity? No, this is about decency. This is about respect. Two things you clearly know nothing about." Robert sat bolt upright in his chair, his face finally losing its smugness, replaced by a dark, angry flush. "All right, that is quite enough," he said, his voice low and threatening, trying to reassert his authority over the room. "We didn't mean any harm by it, but if you're going to stand there and throw a childish tantrum, then maybe you're not mature enough for marriage in the first place." That single comment revealed everything. It showed just how little respect he had for me, for my mother, for anything outside of his own inflated ego. That comment, that accusation of immaturity for defending my own mother, was the moment I knew there was nothing left to salvage with these people. Clara finally spoke up then, tugging desperately on my sleeve, her face a mess of panic and embarrassment. "Leo, can we please just go outside and talk about this? Please," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room, more concerned with the spectacle than with the substance of my pain. I pulled my arm away from her grasp, not harshly, but with a finality that made her flinch. "No, Clara, we can't," I said, my voice eerily calm. "We are not taking this outside. We are not hiding this. We are going to deal with it right here, right now. I am done being quiet. I am done pretending." "Not until your parents understand the gravity of what they've just done." Eleanor let out a dramatic sigh, placing a hand on her chest as if she were about to faint. She was shifting into her favorite role, the victim. "Leo, this is supposed to be a happy occasion," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "You are ruining this beautiful evening for everyone." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. I'm ruining the evening? I asked, turning my full attention to her. No, Eleanor, you ruined it the second you decided to use my mother's memory as stand-up material. You and Robert with your cheap shots and your disgusting sense of entitlement. And you, I said, finally turning to face my fiancée, the woman who was still just standing there, looking helpless. You just sat there and you let it happen. You let them do it. Clara's face turned a deep shade of crimson. That's not fair, she said defensively, her voice rising. I didn't know they were going to say all of that. But you laughed, I shot back, the words like stones in my mouth. I looked at you, Clara. I was begging you with my eyes to do something, and you laughed at every single insult. You didn't even try to stop them. You smiled, and you laughed. The whispers in the room were picking up now, a low murmur of gossip and shock as the scene unfolded. I could feel the weight of their stares, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't for them. This was about drawing a line in the sand, a line that had been crossed one too many times. Robert, seeing he had lost control, finally stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He was a big man, and he used his height to try and intimidate me. All right, Leo, if you're so offended, then maybe you should just leave, he said, his voice a low growl as he pointed a thick finger toward the door. For a moment, I actually considered it. The thought of just walking out, of breathing fresh air that wasn't thick with their toxicity, was incredibly tempting. I could just leave them to their perfect little party, to spin their own version of the story where I was the unhinged villain. But then I looked past them, across the room, and I saw my dad. He was watching me, his face grim, but his eyes steady and unwavering. I saw my sister, her expression a mirror of my own anger. They were my support, my true family, and they were waiting to see what I would do. And I realized, with a sudden steely resolve, that I wasn't going to let Robert and Eleanor get away with this. Not this time. No, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the whispers and silencing the room once more. I'm not leaving. Not until you understand what you've done. Robert opened his mouth to respond, probably to threaten me or call security, but I cut him off, taking a step forward. You stand here and you act like my mother was some overbearing, meddling busybody. You paint her as a joke, but you seem to forget that without her meddling, you wouldn't have this restaurant connection in the first place. You wouldn't have a business to brag about. Your son might not have a college degree. My voice grew stronger with every truth I spoke. She didn't do any of those things because she wanted recognition or praise. She didn't do it to take charge. She did it because she was a good person. She did it because she cared about people, even when they didn't deserve it. And you're sitting here in a room filled with people trashing her memory like it's nothing more than a punchline to a bad joke. That's not just disrespectful, I said, my voice dropping low as I looked each of them in the eye. It's disgusting. The room went completely, profoundly silent. Even Robert looked taken aback, like he didn't know how to respond to such raw, unvarnished truth. With that, I stepped back from the table, turned, and grabbed my coat from the back of my chair. You want me to leave? Fine, I said to the room at large, but don't expect me to come back. My dad stood up immediately, without a word, ready to follow me out. My sister grabbed her purse and shot one last, withering glare at Eleanor before joining us. A couple of my friends stood up too, their faces a mixture of shock and support. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Clara call after me, her voice thin and desperate. "Leo, wait!" I didn't stop. I walked straight out of that restaurant, my head held high, even though my heart was pounding in my chest and felt like it was breaking into a million pieces. Outside, the cool night air felt like a blessing. My dad put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud of you." I nodded, unable to speak. I didn't feel proud. I felt angry and hollowed out and utterly betrayed. And in that moment, I realized something with sickening clarity. If Clara couldn't stand up for me, if she couldn't even stand up for the memory of the woman whose kindness had saved her own family, then she was not the person I thought she was. She was a stranger, and I could never, ever marry a stranger. Walking out of that restaurant felt like ripping off a bandage. There was a sharp, searing sting of pain, sure, but the overwhelming feeling that followed was one of profound, soul-deep relief. It was over. The charade of the wedding, the constant grinding disrespect, the awful feeling of being second best in a family I was supposed to be joining, all of it was finally behind me. Or so I thought. We stood on the curb under the pale glow of a street lamp, the sounds of the city a distant hum. My dad still had his hand on my shoulder, a solid, comforting weight. My sister was fuming, muttering under her breath about what she'd like to say to Eleanor. Part of me, the exhausted part, had done the right thing by walking out. I had defended my mother, said my piece, and removed myself from a toxic situation. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger and colder by the second, couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. It wasn't finished. If I left things as they were, I knew exactly what would happen. Clara and her family would spin the story to make me the bad guy. It was their specialty. They would twist my grief-fueled anger into an unprovoked, hysterical outburst. They'd frame it as me being too sensitive or overreacting to a harmless joke. They would seize control of the narrative, and by morning, I would be the unstable fiancé who ruined a perfectly lovely evening. No, I couldn't let that happen. This wasn't just about my wounded pride anymore. This was about my mother, about her memory, and about the fundamental values she stood for. I would not let them tarnish her name and then paint me as the villain for defending it. I took a long, deep breath and turned to my dad. "I need to go back in there," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What?" my sister blurted out, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Leo, why? Are you crazy? You don't owe those horrible people anything." "I know," I said, looking from her concerned face to my father's questioning one. "I don't owe them a thing, but I owe this to myself. I'm not leaving this unfinished. I need to make it crystal clear to Clara, to her parents, and to every single person in that room that this isn't a fight. This is an ending. I'm done, for good." My dad studied my face for a long moment, then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "If that's what you need to do, son, we'll be right there behind you." "No," I said, shaking my head. The thought of their support meant the world to me, but this last step had to be mine alone. This is something I have to do on my own. My sister looked like she wanted to argue, her mouth opening and closing, but she saw the look in my eyes and held her tongue. I turned and walked back toward the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. My stomach was churning, twisted into a tight, anxious knot, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I wasn't walking back in there to cause another scene. I wasn't going back to argue or to scream. I was walking back in there to end things, once and for all, on my own terms. The moment I pushed the door open and stepped back inside, a wave of whispers immediately rippled through the room. People were stealing glances at the door, their conversations dying mid-sentence. I saw Clara still sitting at the table, her face pale and her eyes wide and red-rimmed. When she saw me, she shot to her feet, a look of desperate hope and terror on her face. "Leo," she said, her voice a strained whisper, "what are you doing?" I didn't answer her. I didn't even look at her. My gaze was fixed on the front of the room, on the small, elevated space where Robert had stood to deliver his speech. I walked with a purpose I hadn't felt before, right past our table, right past my former fiancé, and straight to the front. Robert and Eleanor were still seated at their prominent table, and I could see them watching me. Robert raised a single, arrogant eyebrow, clearly not expecting me to return. Eleanor gave me that same fake, cloyingly sweet smile she had been using all night, as if she thought I had come back to apologize. "Back so soon," Robert said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I ignored him, turning instead to face the entire room. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice ringing out, clear and steady, silencing the murmurs instantly. All eyes were on me again, but this time the power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the victim of the joke anymore. I was in control. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but I kept my voice perfectly level. I have something I need to say. I let my eyes sweep across the room, finally landing on Clara, who was now standing frozen by the table, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles were white. "I know this isn't the time or the place that anyone expected for this," I began, letting the silence stretch for a beat. "But after what has happened here tonight, I don't see any reason to wait." I took one last deep breath. This wedding is off. The room erupted. It was an explosion of sound, sharp, collective gasps, a sudden roar of murmurs and whispers, the screech of chairs as people turned to each other in disbelief. Clara's jaw dropped, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. "Leo, no," she whispered, the words lost in the chaos, her face a mask of pure horror. But I just held up a hand, a simple, commanding gesture to stop her. And to my own surprise, the room began to fall silent once more, waiting to hear what would come next. The room was dead silent now, not the tense, uncomfortable silence from before, but a deep, profound quiet filled with shock and awe. Even the waitstaff, who had been professionally trying to ignore the drama, stood frozen in the corners of the room, trays balanced in their hands, their eyes wide. Every person in that room was holding their breath, waiting. I turned my gaze back to the sea of faces, to the guests who had come to celebrate a union that I now knew was built on a foundation of lies and disrespect. "This isn't just about what happened tonight," I said, though God knows tonight was unforgivable. "This is about a pattern. This is about the kind of family I would be marrying into." I glanced over at Robert and Eleanor, who were staring at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. It's a family that has shown time and time again that they do not respect me. It's a family that can stand up in public and mock the memory of my mother, the kindest, most decent person I have ever known. And in doing so, they have shown that they do not respect the values she raised me with. The values of kindness, integrity, and basic human decency. I paused, letting the words sink in. I cannot and I will not spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells. I will not spend my life biting my tongue while my wife's family belittles me and insults the memory of the people I love. I won't be treated like this. I deserve better. Robert finally found his voice, a low, guttural growl. He was on his feet now, his face a thunderous shade of red. "You're making a big mistake, kid," he seethed, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're throwing away a really good thing here over absolutely nothing." A short, bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound completely devoid of humor. "Nothing?" I repeated, my voice rising with incredulous anger. "You think the public humiliation of my late mother is nothing? You think years of your condescending remarks and your wife's passive-aggressive insults are nothing? You think my fiancé laughing along while you mock the woman who saved your entire livelihood is nothing?" I shook my head, a sad, bitter smile on my face. "No, Robert. The only mistake here would be going through with this wedding. The mistake would be tying myself to a family that is so morally bankrupt they can't even recognize common decency. The mistake would be condemning myself to a life with people who don't deserve my respect, let alone my love." Eleanor, looking like she was about to cry from sheer mortification that their carefully curated event had imploded so spectacularly, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Leo," she pleaded, her voice shaky and pathetic, "let's not make any hasty decisions in the heat of the moment. We can all talk about this tomorrow when everyone has had a chance to cool down." "No," I said firmly, my voice like ice. The anger had burned away, leaving behind only a cold, hard certainty. "We will not be talking about this tomorrow. We will not be talking about this ever again. There is nothing left to discuss. This is done." I turned to look at Clara one last time. Her face was a mess, streaked with tears and mascara. She looked like she didn't know whether to scream at me or beg. But looking at her, I didn't feel a shred of pity. I didn't feel the love that had sustained me for 6 years. I just felt a profound and aching disappointment. The woman I thought I knew was gone, if she had ever really existed at all. In her place was a stranger, a weak-willed woman who had made her choice clear when she laughed at her father's cruel jokes. With that, I turned my back on her, on them, on the entire sham of a life we were supposed to build together. I started walking toward the door, my footsteps the only sound in the vast, silent room. They echoed with a finality that felt like freedom. As I reached for the handle, I heard Clara call out behind me, her voice a desperate, broken cry. "Leo, please, don't do this." I paused for a moment, my hand on the cool metal of the door. I turned back to face the room, to face her, one last time. I looked straight at her and said, my voice devoid of all emotion, "I already did." Then I walked out of that restaurant and didn't look back. Walking out for the second time felt like stepping out of a tomb and into the light. There was a sting, of course, the sting of a 6-year relationship ending in the most brutal way imaginable. But the overwhelming feeling was one of release. It was finally, irrevocably over. The next morning, the real fallout began. I woke up to the relentless, buzzing vibration of my phone on the nightstand. It felt like an angry insect was trying to drill its way through the wood. I'd fallen into an exhausted, dreamless sleep after getting home, but the dawn brought with it the digital onslaught I knew was coming. I picked up the phone and saw the screen lit up with notifications. Nearly 100 unread messages, dozens of missed calls. Most of them were from Clara. A handful were from Robert and Eleanor, and there were even a couple from random relatives of hers who I barely knew, undoubtedly dispatched as flying monkeys to report back. I scrolled through them out of a grim sense of obligation, my thumbs swiping across the screen. The tone of the messages ranged from desperately pleading to outright nasty, a chaotic medley of love, threats, and manipulation. Clara's texts were a waterfall of apologies and panic. "Leo, please, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I was scared. Please, just talk to me. I love you more than anything." And then, minutes later, "Are you getting these? Leo, please don't shut me out. We can fix this." Robert's were predictably more aggressive. They were less like messages and more like declarations of war. "You embarrassed my daughter and my family in front of everyone we know. You'll live to regret this pathetic stunt. You better hope our paths don't cross again." And Eleanor, true to form, tried to play the victim, her words dripping with manipulative sentimentality. "I cannot believe you would do this to our sweet Clara. Her heart is completely broken because of your cruelty. She didn't deserve this." I read them all, one by one, and felt absolutely nothing. The words were just pixels on a screen, echoes from a life that no longer felt like mine. It was like reading about characters in a book I'd already finished. With a strange sense of detachment, I silenced my phone and tossed it onto the couch. I wasn't going to engage. I wasn't going to reply. There was nothing left to say. By mid-afternoon, I knew she would come. The texts had stopped about an hour before, a sure sign she was on her way. I had been bracing myself for it all day, pacing my small apartment, trying to shore up my defenses for the inevitable face-to-face confrontation. When the knock finally came, sharp and hesitant, my heart still gave a painful lurch. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes were swollen and red, her face blotchy and pale from hours of crying. And in a detail that was both pitiful and horrifying, she was still wearing the expensive, elegant dress from the night before. It was now rumpled and sad, a costume from a party that had ended in disaster. It looked as if she'd gone straight home, collapsed, and hadn't moved since. "Leo," she said softly, her voice shaking and raw, "can we please talk?" I didn't move. I crossed my arms and leaned my shoulder against the doorframe, creating a barrier between us. "What's there to talk about, Clara?" I said, my voice tired but firm. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but she didn't back down. She took a small step closer into my space. "I know you're angry," she said, her own voice gaining a sliver of strength. "But this is us, Leo. 6 years. We can fix this. We can work through it. People make mistakes." I shook my head slowly, a deep, profound sadness settling over me. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice quiet. "This isn't something we can just work through. This isn't like forgetting an anniversary or having a stupid argument about money. This wasn't a mistake." I looked her straight in the eye. "A mistake is something you do by accident. What you did was a choice. You chose to sit there and smile while your parents tore my mother's memory to shreds. You chose their comfort over my dignity. You chose them over me. That's not a mistake, Clara. That's a revelation. It reveals who you are." The truth of the words hung in the air between us. I could see her struggling to process them, to find a way to argue against them, but there was no argument. It was the simple, unvarnished truth of what had happened. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. Her voice cracked as she tried a different tactic, aiming for pity. "I was scared." "Okay," she said, the words choked with a sob. "I was just so scared, Leo. I didn't know what to do. They're my parents." The excuse was so weak, so utterly transparent that it almost reignited my anger. But I held it in check, replacing it with a cold, dissecting curiosity. "Scared of what, Clara?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Tell me, what exactly were you scared of in that moment? Were you scared of hurting me, the man you were supposed to marry in a month? Were you scared of dishonoring the memory of my mother, the woman whose generosity you have been benefiting from your entire adult life? Were you scared of doing the right and decent thing?" I took a step toward her, closing the distance between us in the doorway. "Or were you just scared of upsetting your parents? Scared of making a scene? Scared that their friends might think less of your family if you stood up to your father? Which fear was it that was so powerful it made you betray me?" She didn't have an answer. She couldn't even look at me. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking, while silent tears streamed down her blotchy face. Her silence was the loudest confession she could have possibly made. It told me everything I needed to know. Her fear had never been for me. It had been for herself, for her social standing, for the disruption of her comfortable, parentally approved world. My pain hadn't even factored into the equation. After a long, agonizing moment, she finally looked up, her eyes wide with a desperate last-ditch hope. She took another step, her hand reaching out as if to touch my arm, but she stopped herself. "Please, Leo," she whispered, her voice a raw plea. Please don't do this. We can make it work, I swear. I'll talk to my parents. I'll make them apologize to you. A real apology. I almost laughed. The offer was so little, so late, it was insulting. An apology? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. You think a forced apology from those two narcissists is going to fix this? You think their words mean anything to me now? They could get on their knees and beg for my forgiveness, and it wouldn't change a single thing. I looked at her, at the woman who had shared my bed and my life for 6 years, and felt a chasm between us that was miles wide. It's not just about your parents anymore, Clara, I said. I think, for a long time, I let myself believe it was. I told myself they were the problem, and you were just caught in the middle. But I was wrong. I sighed, a heavy, tired sound. Last night, I saw everything clearly for the first time. It's about you. It has always been about you. It's about your weakness, your willingness to stand by and watch them hurt me because you were too cowardly to stand up to them. Last night showed me exactly who you are when things get hard. It showed me where your loyalties really lie. And I can't unsee it. No matter how much I wish I could, I can never go back to seeing you as the woman I thought you were. I let the words settle, watching as the last glimmer of hope in her eyes finally flickered and died. I could see the finality of my decision land on her, a crushing weight. Her face crumpled, the tears of desperation turning into the gut-wrenching sobs of true, irreversible loss. I deserve better than this, Clara, I said, and my mother's memory deserves better than this. She just stood there and cried, her body racked with sobs. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to argue. The truth had been spoken, and it had ended us. Slowly, quietly, I stepped back and pushed the door closed, shutting her out of my apartment and out of my life. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence of the room, a small, definitive sound that marked the end of an era. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and closed my eyes, feeling the profound, aching sorrow of it all, but also the first fragile sense of peace. It was done. It was truly done. In the weeks that followed, a quiet stillness settled over my life. The constant barrage of texts and calls eventually dwindled and then stopped completely. I had blocked their numbers, erased their digital footprints from my life, and built a fortress of silence around myself. The quiet was a relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I had space to breathe, to think, to simply be. The constant low-grade stress of navigating my relationship with Clara and her family was gone, and its absence was like the end of a long, debilitating fever. I was beginning to heal. One Saturday afternoon, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time, I decided to open my mom's old keepsake box. It was a beautiful cherrywood box she had kept on her dresser, and I'd held on to it ever since she passed, a tangible link to her memory. I hadn't looked inside since the breakup. Inside were her treasures, small things that held the universe of her life, her favorite pearl necklace that she wore to every special occasion, a pair of simple silver earrings she used to wear to church, and a small, delicate gold locket with a picture of my grandmother inside. That locket was different from everything else. It had been in my family for generations, a fragile thread of gold connecting mothers and daughters through time. It was passed down from my great-grandmother to my grandmother and then to my mom. Before she passed, during one of our last quiet moments together in the hospital, she had pressed it into my hand. Her skin was thin as paper, but her grip was firm. "One day, Leo," she had whispered, her voice weak but clear, "you'll meet the right person, someone with a heart as kind as yours. When you know, you'll know, and you'll give this to her." I'd kept it tucked safely in the soft velvet lining of the box ever since, waiting for that day. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry to me. It was a promise. It was a piece of her, a piece of our family's history, a sacred trust. But when I opened the box that day, my heart full of warm memories, the small indentation in the velvet where the locket always rested was empty. The locket was gone. At first, I thought I was imagining things. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. "No," I whispered to the empty room. I carefully lifted the velvet lining, my fingers trembling slightly. Nothing. I tipped the box over, emptying its precious contents onto my bed, a cascade of memories. I searched through every item, my movements becoming more frantic. I tore my bedroom apart, pulling out drawers, checking under the bed, searching through pockets of old coats. Nothing. It wasn't there. My heart sank like a stone in my chest as the cold, sickening realization hit me. Someone had taken it. And there was only one person who could have. The only person who had been in my apartment recently, besides my own family and a few close friends I trusted with my life, was Clara. My stomach churned as I pieced it together with dawning horror. She had come over a few weeks after the breakup, on a Tuesday, to drop off the engagement ring. She had been quiet and tearful. It was an awkward, painful exchange. Before she left, she'd asked to use the bathroom. My bedroom, where I kept the keepsake box on a high shelf in the closet, was right next to the bathroom. I had thought nothing of it at the time. Nothing at all. But now, it all made a sickening kind of sense. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling to unblock her number. I typed out a short, blunt message. "Did you take the locket from my mom's keepsake box?" I hit send and stare at the screen, my heart pounding. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. Finally, 3 dots appeared and then disappeared. Then they appeared again. She was typing, deleting, retyping. Finally, a message popped up. "What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean." The blatant lie sent a surge of ice-cold fury through me. "I didn't buy it for a single second. Don't lie to me, Clara. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The gold heirloom locket my mom left for me. It's gone. You are the only person who has been in my apartment. Did you take it?" This time, the pause was longer. I could almost feel her frantic energy through the phone. She was caught. She knew it. When the reply finally came, her message made my blood boil with an intensity that eclipsed even the anger I'd felt at the rehearsal dinner. "I borrowed it. I wanted to keep a piece of her with me. I thought it would help me feel closer to you." Borrowed. She had borrowed it. She had gone into my closet, into a sacred box of my dead mother's things, and stolen the single most precious item in it, an irreplaceable family heirloom, and she had the absolute audacity to call it borrowing. I couldn't believe it. The violation was so profound, so complete, it left me breathless. The audacity of that single word, borrowed, was so immense it defied all reason. My shock instantly curdled into a white-hot rage. I couldn't even trust myself to text. I hit her number on my phone and listened to it ring, each tone tightening the knot of fury in my stomach. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice small and weary. "Leo, you have 5 seconds to explain to me how you could possibly think you had the right to take that locket," I said, my voice dangerously low and controlled. She immediately sounded defensive, as if she were the one who had been wronged. "Leo, it's not a big deal," she said, her voice rising. "Oh my God, I was going to give it back. I just—" "Not a big deal?" I snapped, my control finally breaking. "Are you serious? That locket has been in my family for almost 100 years. It is the single most meaningful thing I have left of my mother. It is not some trinket from a gift shop that you can just take because you feel like it. How could you even think that was okay? I just wanted to feel connected to you," she said, her voice beginning to tremble as she shifted to her default tactic, playing the sympathy card. "I didn't think you'd notice so soon." Of course she didn't, because to her it was just a thing. Its immense sentimental value was something she was incapable of comprehending. "Of course I'd notice," I shouted, now pacing my apartment like a caged animal. "It's my mother's. It's the heart of our family history. The fact that you didn't think to ask me, the fact that you snuck into my closet and stole it like a common thief, makes it a million times worse. She started crying at that point, the familiar sound of her manipulative sobs grating on my last nerve, but I wasn't in the mood to comfort her. I felt nothing but disgust. I'm done with the tears, Clara. I'm done with the excuses. Where is it? Where is my mother's locket, right now? I demanded. There was a pause, filled only by her hitched breathing. It's at my parents' house, she admitted through her sobs. My blood ran cold. I didn't want to lose it, so I left it there, for safekeeping. That was it. That was the final, unforgivable straw. The sheer, mind-bending hypocrisy of it all. Safekeeping, I said, my voice now devoid of all heat, replaced by a chilling calm. You took something that didn't belong to you, something that means more to me than you will ever understand, and you left it for safekeeping in the house of the very people who mocked the woman it belonged to? Are you kidding me? I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry doesn't even begin to cut it, I said coldly. I'm coming to get it, now. I hung up before she could reply. An hour later, I was pulling up to Robert and Eleanor's palatial home. My anger had only grown during the drive, simmering and concentrating into a dense, heavy rage. By the time I walked up their perfectly manicured stone path and hammered on their oversized front door, I was ready to explode. Eleanor opened it, her practiced, fake sweet smile instantly dissolving when she saw the look on my face. "Leo," she said cautiously, her eyes narrowing, "what on earth are you doing here?" "I'm here to get my mother's locket," I said bluntly, pushing past her into the marble-floored foyer. "Clara told me it's here." Her face shifted into a mask of confusion and annoyance. "A locket? What locket?" "Just get it," I interrupted, my voice echoing in the cavernous entryway. She flinched but stepped aside. A few minutes later, Clara came down the sweeping staircase, holding the delicate gold locket in her hand. Her eyes were red and her face was puffy, but I didn't care. All I saw was that precious piece of my family's soul dangling from her fingers like it was nothing. "Here," she said, her voice thick with tears, as she held it out to me. I snatched it from her hand without a word and immediately inspected it, turning it over and over, making sure it was undamaged. When I was satisfied, I stuffed it deep into my pocket and turned to leave without a backward glance. "Leo, wait," she said, her voice desperate. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I spun around to face her, to face them one last time. "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "You didn't just upset me. You stole from me, Clara. You stole from my dead mother. It's like everything you'd already done, all the disrespect, all the betrayal, it just wasn't enough for you. You had to commit one final, unforgivable violation." Her face crumpled completely, and she started crying again, but I didn't stop. I didn't wait for a response. I walked to the door and pulled it open. This time, I didn't hold back. I slammed it shut behind me, and the resounding boom was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. In the days that followed, I methodically erased every last trace of her. I blocked her number again, deleted every photo, and threw out every gift and memento. I cut off every possible avenue for her or her family to ever contact me again. I was done with her family, and with all the toxic drama they had dragged into my life. Calling off the wedding had been hard. Discovering this final, despicable theft had been the nail in the coffin. And as utterly exhausting and painful as the entire ordeal had been, it also felt like closure. I had stood up for myself. I had stood up for my mom, and in reclaiming that locket, I had reclaimed my own peace. For the first time in a very long time, I felt truly free. Leo's gut-wrenching story serves as a powerful testament to the importance of self-worth and the courage it takes to enforce your boundaries. It's a vivid lesson that love should never demand the sacrifice of your dignity or ask you to stay silent when the memory of a loved one is disrespected. Through Leo's painful journey, we see how a series of red flags can lead to an unforgivable betrayal, and that the hardest choice, to walk away, can be the most profound act of self-love. His story isn't just about a wedding called off. It's about reclaiming one's voice and choosing to honor oneself above all else. If compelling, emotional stories like this resonate with you, please support our mission to share them. Hit the like button to show your appreciation, subscribe to join our community for more powerful narratives, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of our journey. We are building a global audience of thoughtful listeners, and we'd love to know where you fit in. Let us know which country or region you're watching from in the comments below. Thank you for being here.